Good afternoon and welcome to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. My name is Buffy. Welcome. Happy to have you. If you're a returning viewer, welcome. Happy to have you. If you're new, welcome. Happy to have you. So I am an 18-year criminal defense attorney who has practiced criminal law for over 18 years. I've done jury trials and such. So I will be providing the legal analysis where legal analysis presents itself. And you can count on me to not say that something happened or someone got out of something based on a technicality, because technicality is a cop-out. No way will I be saying that. Additionally, we will go through this in a compassionate way to those who lost their lives or were victims of a crime, because I think it's very important to support the victims. I am also a person who has represented sexual assault and domestic violence victims. So I think it's extremely important to be cognizant of the things that they have gone through and to honor their experience and not sensationalize it. So you will not get a lot of sensationalism from me. Okay? So today we are talking about Charles Ross. You may not be familiar with Charles Ross, but I will introduce you. This is called Kidnapping, Ransom, and the Illusion of Control. Let me start with something that's easy to miss about kidnapping cases. We tend to think of them as crimes of control. Someone takes a person, then they demand something in return, and they believe they're managing the outcome. But legally speaking, kidnappings are some of the most unstable, failure-prone crimes there are. And the case of Charles Ross in 1937 is a perfect example of why. Because this wasn't a chaotic disappearance. This wasn't a mystery born of neglect. This was a case where people noticed immediately and still couldn't bring it to a clean legal resolution. Who Charles was and why it mattered. Charles Ross was and why it mattered. Charles Ross was a greeting card executive, which may sound unremarkable today, but in the 1930s, it placed him firmly in the category of respectable, visible, middle to upper class professional. That matters. Ross had a predictable routine, a professional network, financial traceability, and people who expected him to show up. So when he disappeared, law enforcement didn't ask if something was wrong. They asked what kind of crime had occurred. That distinction is critical. His reliability let the police know that something was amiss. The initial assumption was kidnapping. From the outset, investigators treated Ross's disappearance as a kidnapping, not a voluntary vanishing or accident. Legally, the assumption shapes everything. Investigative strategy, allocation of resources, the way evidence is interpreted. Given his character, it was pretty clear that he didn't just walk away. He didn't have an accident. He didn't vanish voluntarily. Kidnapping implies intent, planning, and leverage. And in the 1930s, leverage almost always meant ransom. Ransom cases in the 1930s. Here's where legal reality comes in, and where modern listeners often underestimate how fragile these cases were. In 1937, phone calls could not be easily traced. Written ransom notes were difficult to authenticate. Banking surveillance was minimal. Serial numbers were rarely tracked in real time. So even when law enforcement believed a ransom demand existed, proving who made it and tying it to a suspect was extremely difficult. If you think about it, I don't know if any of you have actually seen the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio called Catch Me If You Can. It was how Frank Abagnale was able to literally kite checks, because it took so long for them to be able to keep track of him. And he was always 2 to 3 to 5 steps ahead of them because of how the system worked. That is very similar. Today, we are spoiled, if we're being honest. We are very, very spoiled because we get things quickly. If we have to wait a day, it seems like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever. But back then, they were probably a lot more patient than we were, right? I mean, we have Amazon delivery we can get in a day or two. I mean, we are very spoiled, I think, in some ways. So from a prosecutorial standpoint, that's a nightmare. They literally had none of the advantages that we have today. I mean, 1937, you think about, of course they didn't. Because even if you suspect someone, suspicion doesn't survive court, right? Because in cases like this, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not more likely than not. More likely than not is actually the civil standard. So we're not going civil standard. We're actually going criminal standard, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. And a lot of people have a lot of questions as to what that is. And it is essentially a very serious standard in which the prosecution has the burden of proof. The defense doesn't have to assert anything. We always say when we're doing jury trials that, I could sit and read the newspaper now. Would a actual legitimate attorney just sit and read the newspaper while their client's on trial? Absolutely not. But it is the ability to say, hey, I don't have this burden of proof. The only exception to that is, let's say that you have an affirmative defense. For instance, affirmative defense would be something along the lines of, yes, I killed that person, but I killed that person in self-defense. So then the burden shifts to the defendant to prove that they actually acted in self-defense. And so that's when they get the burden. They don't get the burden to prove that they're innocent or not guilty, right? Because the prosecution is bringing the case. It is their case. They have that burden. And it's a very high standard for a reason. Many legal scholars have said it's better that one man go free than an innocent man be convicted for a crime that he didn't commit. And that is what our system stands on. Jurisprudence of fairness, due process, the right to remain silent, which came much later in the 60s, the Miranda decision, not having to self-incriminate yourself. But I digress. Motive alone isn't enough. And honestly, a lot of prosecutors, literally don't go into motive unless they know, absolutely. And motive isn't required to be able to pursue a criminal case. Now, you might be being fancy if you add a motive. Maybe you have a motive. Maybe the prosecution has that. But again, that's not enough to convict someone. Opportunity without corroboration collapses under cross-examination. And the thing is, once you destroy your trust with a jury, you're pretty much done. If you do something or say something that is wrong or misleading the jury in some way, you risk losing credibility pretty quickly. And this is where the law begins to show its limits, meaning they're not looking to just convict anyone. They're looking to convict the person who committed the crime. Effort versus outcome. This is an important legal distinction. What stands out in the Ross case is not indifference, it's effort. There was public concern, there was investigative follow-through, media attention, and legally that matters. Was it because Ross was a middle to upper class person? Was it because he was a reliable person? Was it because he was counted on? Was it because he was a pillar in the community? Oftentimes people point to disparity in how certain cases are handled. And I think that is a fair assessment. Some people get some people get more attention than others. I did a case a while back on Evelyn Hernandez and Lacey Peterson, for instance. For some reason, Evelyn Hernandez did not get the coverage that Lacey Peterson got. Again, that happens all the time. That's biases that are unfair, because ultimately everyone should have an equal opportunity to be found, especially if they're missing. And the thing about Evelyn Hernandez, if you haven't watched it, was the fact that she also, I believe her 5-year-old son also went missing with her and has not been located. So again, that's an urgency with a child as well. So, you think about things like that. Also, the media attention. And legally that matters, because justice isn't only measured by convictions. It's also measured by whether the system mobilizes at all. Ross's case did mobilize, and yet resolution still failed. And that tension is extremely important because the system is not perfect. We know it's not perfect. And unfortunately, we live under that cloud every day, especially if you've been a victim of a crime or you are close to someone who's been a victim of a crime. It's really heart-wrenching and it's really sad. I actually became an attorney because I believed in justice. I wanted to give others justice. And I know it sounds like pie in the sky because, justice isn't perfect, but unfortunately, it's all we have. So why the case couldn't be built? To begin, to bring a kidnapping case to court, prosecutors generally need proof of unlawful confinement or movement, evidence of intent, that is called mens rea, which essentially translates to guilty mind. A suspect tied directly to the act. In Ross's case, what was missing was the connective tissue, meaning be able to put it all together. There were no reliable witnesses, no definitive crime scene, no body, no recovered ransom exchange. Legally, this creates reasonable doubt everywhere. And you kind of wonder, who took Ross? Was it one person or was it many? Because you think about it, the more people you have involved in a crime like that, the more likely that someone is going to talk, especially to get some sort of deal or to get themselves out of something. And reasonable doubt doesn't mean maybe innocent. It means the state cannot meet its burden. The burden is substantially a high bar for a reason. Otherwise, they would convict everyone, right? Oh, well, you probably likely did it. Guilty. We don't want that. That's not how our system works. And that distinction is everything. Let's talk about class, visibility, and expectation. One of the reasons this case still matters is what it reveals about whose cases receive sustained effort. Ross's disappearance violated social expectations. People like him weren't supposed to vanish, and so the system responded accordingly. Contrast that with victims who disappear without professional titles, financial records, or advocates, similarly to the Torso case that I did previously. Cases that quietly fade, not because they matter less, but because the system has less to work with. Justice begins with recognition. And let's talk about something broader, the illusion of control. Kidnapping is often imagined as a crime where the perpetrator holds power, but legally it's the opposite. The moment someone disappears, control fractures. Evidence degrades, timelines blur, narratives compete. The Ross case shows us that even when society cares, even when effort is applied, the law still has limits, and those limits don't distribute evenly. So in closing, Charles Ross didn't disappear because no one noticed. He disappeared because the law, even at its most attentive, could not bridge the gap between suspicion and proof. And that is an uncomfortable truth even for me. Because it reminds us that justice is not only about caring, it's about what can actually be proven. And sometimes, even when someone matters, the law still comes up short. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you'll tune in to us again soon. Bye-bye.